So now let's look at a simple example. And I'm going to read out the example, and I want you to think about the nature of this argument. So this is the first thing to reflect on, and then I'll talk about it in a little more detail. Have a look at this very simple argument here. Joe is taller than Sam. Sam is taller than Ted. Those are our premises. The conclusion, Joe is taller than Ted. Now, you probably could have figured this one out. If I had just given you, say, let's say I just said, okay, I'm just giving you this much, right? Joe is taller than Sam. Sam is taller than Ted. What can you infer? I'm sure most of you thought about it a bit. You'd say, oh, well, Joe is got to be taller than Ted. What if I said to you something like this? Yeah, it's true that Joe is taller than Sam, and it's also true that Sam is taller than Ted, but it's not the case that Joe is taller than Ted. You probably think there's something wrong going on here. There's some kind of, like, did you contradict yourself, or did you make some fundamental error somewhere? Something's gone wrong. Well, in this case, what we've got is this is an argument such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Right? You can't have it where you'd say that those premises are true and the conclusion is false. If you try to do that, I mean, you could say it, of course, but you're contradicting yourself. So this is a good, simple, straightforward example of a deductive argument. In other words, the degree of support that the premises give the conclusion is complete. In other words, what do I mean by complete? Digging a little bit more into our terminology. By complete, I mean that if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. Now, when you have an argument that such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. This is, as I called, a valid, this is I use the term deductive argument. We also use the term valid. Now, if you remember in the previous video, I talked about arguments. Remember, arguments are never true and false. Don't think of arguments like that. Sentences, premises can be true and false, not arguments. Arguments can be deductive, or the term that I'm going to use most often, valid. This is a valid argument. Now, it's going to be very important that you understand. Oh, one of my lights blew out. Technical problems on the set. Anyways, I'll finish up here by saying that we've got to get clearer on this notion of validity. But for the first step, that is, our notion of validity says that it applies to arguments, right? Not to sentences now. Don't say a sentence is valid or a premise is valid. No, sentences, premises, those are true, false. Arguments are valid or invalid. This is a valid argument because it says, the argument is, if the premises are true, that the conclusion must be true. Now, what if you say, wait a second, I know these guys. It's not true that Joe is taller than Sam. Maybe that's a false statement or a false sentence. That's fine. But nonetheless, and here's the important point to see if you're really getting the concept of validity. This argument is saying that if, this is a big important thing, this conditional, if the premises are true. So if, for the sake of discussion, you know when you say to your friend, yeah, but for the sake of argument, or just suppose this is the case, and then you make an inference, you draw a conclusion. If Joe is taller than Sam, and it is also the case that Sam is taller than Ted, then it must be the case that Joe is taller than Ted. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So a valid argument only says that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. This argument is still valid, even if these premises are in fact false. So this is the subtle point to get your head around, is that this argument is valid when you say that if you hold these true, then you cannot make this one false, right? Unless you change the wording. But if you keep all the wording, you can't get around it. That's the important point about validity, is that it holds whether or not, in fact, in reality, these sentences are true or false. It doesn't really matter. It just says if you accept them, then you must, if you accept the premises as true, then you must accept the conclusion as true. It takes a while. Most students have a little bit of trouble getting this concept of validity. So read over the book. There's a number of examples in chapter 1, pages 1 to 11. Have a look at those, and we'll look at some more examples from time to time. But we're going to look even more deeply into this, because not only do we have to worry about valid arguments, we've got to worry about the next concept, which is the notion of soundness. So we're still looking at deductive arguments, valid arguments, same idea. And we want to look now at how a deductive argument can not only just have this notion of validity, but in some cases it's sound. See you next video.